Good morning. It's good to be with you here today on Sunday when most of you are watching this. First of all, I just want to say thank you for all the prayers and support you've been showing Lori Ann and I with the passing of my dad. It's been a time of sorrow, also a time of reflection and looking at the things he did with his life, which have been really encouraging. I was going through his office and I found a letter in there from when he was serving in Korea. This was shortly after the war, and I was working with an orphanage there, and had written a letter back home looking for some extra funds to be sent over from whoever could send it, hopefully to help out the kids there. And I know he'd done a lot of work with the orphanage there, but he gave me a little extra insight into what he did. And I think those things are encouraging. We want to see, the good things that others have done. Of course, I know a lot of things about what my dad has done, but even this past week I learned a lot more. And I think it speaks to the person he was, but I think also in ourselves, we want to be that kind of person that is remembered well, that lives a life that is pleasing to others and God and makes a difference. And today we're going to continue our study in Exodus, where we're looking at how to be those people that are pleasing to God, that leave a legacy that makes God happy, and by course of that, we will make others around us happy as well. And Exodus has really been a great book, teaching us about how God took the Israelites out of Egypt, but in the process, he took Egypt, the Egyptian ways, the culture, out of the Israelites. And that was so crucial, because what was in there from Egypt was a worldliness and a paganism that needed to be purified and refined. And we're actually in the same boat today. The world keeps trying to force its way into our lives. We have to keep resisting and pushing it back out. And even as we seem to stick our finger in one hole in the dike, Satan finds another way to get into our lives to snare us or trap us or fool us into thinking that maybe his way is better. But the book of Exodus really speaks to how God was transforming his people. And I think Darren said it well last week. We are not the person that we ought to be, but we're not the person we used to be. I think that speaks to that ongoing sanctification that takes place in a Christian. We have that initial sanctification that makes us justified and we're saved. Then there's final sanctification when we're done with this life. But in the in-between is where we're living right now. And we're going through this ongoing process of being refined and transformed. And we saw that last week in Darren's lesson. And this week we'll see another aspect of how God is continuing to work on his people. And so we're going to be picking up in Exodus chapter 18. And a little background here before we dive in there is that a major player in this chapter is Jethro. And that's Moses' father-in-law. And we met him, maybe 10 chapters ago. But he's coming back on the scene here. Moses had apparently sent his wife and children to be with Jethro. Maybe that's because he felt like there was too much danger in taking them directly back to Egypt, or maybe they would be targeted or something. And so they're with Jethro. But Jethro hears of the great news of the Exodus and what God is doing for the Israelites. He sends word to Moses, "Hey, I'm coming, and I'm bringing the family." He's looking forward to seeing Moses. And we hear earlier that Jethro was a Midianite priest. And from everything I could discern and reading and researching on it, it appears that he was actually worshiping the true God. And so it's interesting to see how God uses people from different paths along the way to help mold and shape his people. And Jethro is going to have a significant part in terms of how Moses takes care of the Israelites. And so we're going to begin here in Exodus chapter 18, and we're going to pick up in verse 13. And they're going out. This is the day after they've kind of had a chance for Moses and Jethro to reconnect with the family or whatever. But the next day, Moses is going about his normal duties, and Jethro is going along going, "Hey, I want to see these people." And so in verse 13, it says, "The next day, Moses took his seat to hear the people's disputes against each other. They waited before him from morning till evening. When Moses' father-in-law saw all that Moses was doing for the people, he asked, 'What are you really accomplishing here? Why are you trying to do all this alone while everyone stands around you from morning till evening?' Moses replied, 'Because the people come to me to get a ruling from God. When a dispute arises, they come to me, and I'm the one who settles the case between the quarreling parties. I inform the people of God's decrees and give them his instructions. So Moses is settling disputes. There's many different estimates of the number of Israelites that were out there. Some are lower than others. Gosh, from everything I can tell, a good ballpark figure would be over 1 million people. I mean, it's a huge number of people. So with a huge number of people, they're going to bump into each other. There's going to be disputes. I mean, maybe it's over who owns a camel. Or, some guy's ox crashed into another guy's tent and destroyed it and he needs some sort of restitution. Or, hey, that was an overvalued bride price there. Although that could be a very sticky one to solve. And whatever else Israelites are quarreling over. And so the question that Jethro poses is, Moses, why are you doing this just you? Which that does seem like an insane process. Because, each case is going to take a while. With 1 million people or more, there's going to be a lot of cases to hear. And so every day, even if it's just 1% of the people, 1% of 1 million is like 10,000 people. So, a tenth of that is 1,000 people. So there's no way he can really be adequately taking care of this. And so what's driving this? Is it the hero leader syndrome? I've got to do it all. I'm God's chosen man. I'm going to make the difference. He's been speaking to me, so this is my job. I can't really, delegate out something as serious as this. Maybe everybody's just like, look, I don't want to go to anybody else but Moses. They got to speak to the head honcho. So maybe that's driving this, is that the people are demanding to see Moses. Maybe he just started doing stuff. One day one guy came, the next day 3, and then 5, and then before long it becomes something he never really thought would happen. But however we got there, Jethro here is going to offer him some advice, because it's clear that this path right here, this is probably going to wear Moses out, and as Jethro says as much here in this next section. So let's pick up again in Exodus 18, verse 17. This is not good, Moses' father-in-law exclaimed. You're going to wear yourself out, and the people too. This job is too heavy a burden for you to handle all by yourself. Now listen to me. Let me give you a word of advice. And may God be with you. You should continue to be the people's representative before God. Bring their disputes to him. Teach them God's decrees and give them his instructions. Show them how to conduct their lives. But select from all the people some capable, honest men who fear God and hate bribes. Appoint them as leaders over groups of 1,000, 100, 50, and 10. They should always be available to solve people's common disputes, but have them bring the major cases to you. Let the leaders decide the small matters among themselves. They will help you carry the load, making the task easier for you. If you follow this advice, and if God commands you to do so, then you will be able to endure the pressures, and all these people will go home in peace. So Jethro says, yes, you're the one to lead. We're not questioning that, but you can't do it all alone. You're going to need help. Otherwise, you're going to suffer, and the people are going to suffer. The disputes will drag on and on. You'll be tied up doing this all day long, every day. He says, look, go find some spiritually capable helpers or capable leaders. And I think that's important. We need capable and we need spiritual. Sometimes we can be capable and not so spiritual. Sometimes we're very spiritual, but we're not necessarily gifted in this area. And so they've got to go find out people that are able to do it, but are of high character and suited for this task. Now, this task doesn't mean they're suited to preach or they're suited to necessarily be an elder and a leader of all the people, but they're suited for this task, which I think is important. And this, with the wisdom now, we can divide out the responsibilities and Moses won't be overwhelmed. What a genius idea. Delegate appropriately. A lot of times it's a very simple idea, and yet it can be hard to do. Leaders can be reluctant to delegate because they feel like they're the best one to solve that problem. And sometimes that's the case, but at the same time, you might miss hidden gems of what other people can actually do, and you can't do everything. And even as a small group leader, we can sometimes do everything in the small group, and that's a mistake. We should be delegating things out and looking for the giftings that's in our small groups. And if you're in a small group, volunteer your gift. Pitch in and help out. But I think we also see this idea in the New Testament. if we flip over to Ephesians chapter 4, we'll read not the exact same thing, but in the similar vein. In verse 16, it says, He makes the whole body fit together perfectly, as each part does its own special work. It helps the other parts grow so that the whole body is healthy and growing and full of love. When each person uses his or her gifts, great things happen. That's how the workload gets distributed in God's New Testament church, is each person using what God has gifted them for. Some people are very good at organizing things, and maybe they should be running events, and other people are good, with a warm, welcoming smile, and they should be part of the ushering team, greeting people coming in. Others are capable singers and should be in the worship service, leading it. Others are gifted for teaching. And so that would be a major place for them to play a role to help build up God's church. Now, not every role requires super gifting. I can serve and be a helper in kids' kingdom, even if I'm not an expert teacher. And so there's different ways that we can express our roles, but there's this spirit of let me use my gift and help build up the church. The church works well together in a healthy, growing, and loving way when we're all pitching in. And this sounds awesome, and it is. But I think all too often I've heard about 20% of the people doing 80% of the work. I think that's a common thing you'll hear at work and in most organizations you're in. But the sad thing is, all too often that can also be true in God's church, and it should not be. We should all be contributing to the work using the gifts that God has given us. I think what it takes, though, in order for us to really all pitch in, a lot of times there's two characteristics that really make a difference in terms of what we can contribute to God's kingdom. And those two characteristics are humility and willingness. Now, humility, in theory, this is great. It's awesome. But humility is much easier in theory than it is in practice. If you're back there and Moses is selecting the different people to lead thousands and hundreds and fifties and tens, and you're selected to lead 10, and you think, I should be leading hundreds. How's that going? Or, heaven forbid, you were selected to not lead and you thought you should be leading thousands. Then you'd really have probably some stress there. It's hard to let other people give an evaluation of where they think we are. And it's hard to trust. Because too often we want to raise our hand and go, look, this is why I should be doing it or not doing it. And, I'm not saying that's never a valid point, but often we don't trust other people's evaluations. We are too quick to trust ourselves and too slow to trust others. Or perhaps we're too slow to trust God's refinement of our lives. Oftentimes, you can end up being placed in a position that you don't feel like your gifts really are going to be best used and you should be at a quote-unquote higher level. And yet God knows He's got to burn some pride out. He's got to help you be more humble and more teachable, or whatever the case. That's not always the case. But it is the case that God does refine, and it is the case that whatever happens, God knows. It's not an accident. You could put a new thought in somebody else's mind. You could have somebody go raise a question or whatever. I think the thing is we feel like, if we don't raise our hand, or if we don't object, if we don't make it known, it's not going to work out, when instead, maybe we could trust God. Where is God going in all of this? Humility is, I could be wrong. Maybe I don't have an accurate view of my own talents. That's possible. Or maybe somebody else doesn't understand the talents. Or maybe you don't even know your proper gifting. Maybe you're over here thinking you can do A and really you can do B. I think we've all experienced a situation, we've been around someone who thinks they can sing, and then they sing, and they may still think they can sing, but we know they can't sing. Is that bad? It's bad only if I have to listen to them. It's important for people to be humble and go, bro, you're not a great singer. You got a great heart. You fit well in the category of making a joyful noise, but singing is not your gift. And so often we may want something more so than our gifting allows. And that's where we've got to surrender and trust God, because that's the core of humility, is thinking, okay, let me take in what others think. Let me take in what God is doing. Let me have some self-reflection. Let me evaluate. Because if everyone has got to lead, then no one can fit in the right position because God didn't make it for everybody to lead. He clearly here was laying out thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens, which means there were a lot of people that weren't even selected to lead. It's just the way things go. And so the question is, are you able to be humble with how maybe the church helps you find your gift? And what if you're under a guy that you think you should be over? Are you able to let God use that to teach you and to train you? Can you support that person 100%? Can you put aside any selfish ambition that might be creeping up? And instead go, you know what? Let me serve, let me give, let me help. You know, so often we can desire things beyond what our capabilities are or for when God is ready for us. And so we end up being tested in these kinds of times. Can we be humble and listen to what God is saying? And so there's the humility factor, but then there's also a willingness factor. Are you willing? I've also been in the situation where I've asked people that I believe were clearly gifted in a particular area, and they're like, no, I don't want to do that. Now, certainly sometimes there were good reasons for people not doing it. But all too often, I've run across people that are not willing because it's hard work. And it surely is hard work to settle disputes. It's hard work to serve in kids' crew. It's hard work to usher on Sunday morning. It's hard work to lead a small group, a house church. Like wherever we serve in God's kingdom, it takes energy and effort. It's hard work to be a mentor for a teen. Yet all of these are great works, but it requires sacrifice. And the question is, are we willing to sacrifice to build up God's church? Because it will not be built up without sacrifice. And I have found in my own life that my call to sacrifice and my willingness to sacrifice often don't match. Typically, willingness is lower than the higher calling. Now, obviously, we got to have limits. We can't overdo it. But the reality of it is, a lot of times, I value my comfort more than my desire to help. And so, I'm okay to pass on some of these opportunities. And then sometimes there's things that I'm like, well, it's awkward or difficult. So often I have a challenge when it comes to serving the poor, and we go into these situations that are very difficult, and I feel awkward and nervous and tense in it, and I want everything to be all better, and I can't fix it, and sometimes we're working with people that aren't particularly stable, and what exactly do you do? And yet it's good for me to lean into those opportunities to learn how to be more like Jesus, to learn how to be giving when it's difficult. And the times that I've gone ahead and leaned into it, those have been the times that I grow the most. Like, oh, this is what God meant when he talked about denying yourself for the sake of others. And then you can see the blessings. You can see the smile that comes across somebody's face, or the gratitude, or even just the satisfaction of doing what Jesus wants. Because the truth is, you don't always get a smile. You don't always get gratitude. Sometimes the people that you're trying to help actually give you negativity back. So it's not like it always works out in the short term, but in the long term, it always works out because we're doing what God called us to do. But a willingness to step in the gap and to make a difference and to do what God has gifted you to do. You know, the challenge is for us to step in and step away from all the distractions of this world. Because one of the huge distractions of this world is you deserve comfort, you deserve your space, you deserve your freedom, you deserve time to unwind. And it's so overemphasized. All of those things are true, but our world values them in excess. It's always looking for the next vacation. It's always looking for the next Netflix series to binge watch. I mean, there's always something calling us to not do the work of God's church and the work of the kingdom. What pulls at your heart? What stops you? And often we can let good things stop us. I got to work out to be in shape and take care of my body. True. But have you taken that to the excess beyond what your schedule will practically allow and allow you to be a wholehearted disciple of Jesus? Or we can be all in on our kids. And I want us to be all in on our kids, loving them and raising them. But truth is, they can't compete in every sport. Truth is, not very many of them are going to get college scholarships. And I don't want us to get caught up in pursuing something that in the end does not have a difference in eternity. If your kid excels at football and gets a scholarship and becomes an All-American, awesome. But if he abandons the gospel because he gets lost in himself or whatever, is that good? You see, the willingness is, are we willing to build the kingdom the way God wants us to build it? You know, Moses here was calling everybody to participate in this plan. There were those that were called to lead, and then the people were called to go, okay, we support this. And so, as always, that's the challenge. The willingness to play our part and also our willingness to support others as they play their part. And be content that God will work out your role and your spot and your place in His good time. As we read on here, it says in verse 24, Moses listened to his father-in-law's advice and followed his suggestions. He chose capable men from all over Israel and appointed them as leaders over the people. He put them in charge of groups of 1,150 and 10. These men were always available to solve the people's common disputes. They brought the major cases to Moses, but they took care of the smaller matters themselves. Soon after this, Moses said goodbye to his father-in-law, who returned to his own land. You gotta love Moses. Moses has been selected to be the leader of God's people. You know, and if we look back and see in Moses' life, actually we look ahead to look back. If we look in Acts chapter 7, it's revealed to us there that Moses thought, hey, I'm going to kill that Egyptian that he killed back in, maybe it was Exodus 4 or 5. And the people recognized he was there to deliver them. He was ready to be a deliverer. And that didn't work out that way. And he got put into exile. But that period has served to humble him. And so now he's able to take Jethro's advice. Jethro wasn't selected. He's a little bit, of an offshoot of the Israelites. And yet he's able to take his advice and go, you know what? That sounds good. Let me put that into practice. What happened? They were able to solve disputes, to work things out. This is such a great example of someone being humble and willing to learn no matter what their age. Are you still willing to learn and do things different no matter what your age? No matter how long you've been around God's church? Are you always able to hear and listen? And maybe you're young, maybe you're a millennial, and you think that maybe us older guys don't always know what we're talking about. And sometimes that's true, we don't. And you've read a lot of studies. And a lot of times those are helpful. But are you willing to learn too? Like, I need to be willing to learn. You need to be willing to learn, no matter what your age. But Moses did. And so the whole community benefited. So my prayer for us as we look to today, what can we learn? We can learn that, hey, each of us has a role to play. And that we can, with humility, find out what that best spot is in due time, in God's time. And then have that willingness to serve where we fit, and a willingness to serve under those or with those who fit in different spots and maybe even something that we desire. But we're happy to lift them up and help them. I pray that this will make a difference for you. And there's a few discussion questions that we have here. I'll just read those through to you right now. I think the first one is, are you willing to serve? Then there's a couple of sub-questions under that. Do you know your character? Are you prone to over-serving or under-serving? Because the truth is, some people will say yes every time when asked to serve, and that's not good either. We don't want to burn people out. Sometimes you need help monitoring that or governing yourself. Do you seek counsel on the best ways to use your gifts? And then a second question is, are you content with your gifting? Maybe you find yourself envious of others' gifts, or, have you sought to understand how your gifts play out in God's church? And then thirdly, are you content with how God arranges the body? Do you trust that God will refine you through its arrangement? And can you be content even when people are in roles that don't seem to fit to you? And it's true, they may not even fit, and yet God is working a bigger purpose in all of that. I pray this will encourage you, and I pray that you'll have a great Sunday. Bye-bye.